Johnny needs TLC and an ounce of inner peace. That's the theme of the trip to Colombia, which I just took. And the TLC could have come about, was aimed to come about, and a little bit of it did come about because there is a different sexual vibe in Colombia and all Caribbean countries. So I've been in the Dominican Republic 6 times, the first time in Colombia, but part of Colombia is very Caribbean. It's really almost identical in so many respects to the style of Dominican Republic. So I was in Cartagena and I was in Bogota. They're two very, very different places. Cartagena is now a world-famous destination location for international travel, and it's right on the coast. And it's got the Caribbean culture. It's got the good, the bad, and the ugly. An Israeli guy, been in Cartagena for 20 years, said that Cartagena was an ideal place because it had 3 elements. And that these 3 elements combined were unusual. It has an old city, just like Jerusalem has an old city. And the old city is a walled city, just like Jerusalem has, and many other places. And it has a new city, and then it has these islands on the Caribbean. So he said, how many places have all 3? Well, yeah, but the new city pretty much sucks. and the islands were completely misadvertised, to say the least. But we'll get to that later. There's an expression in Spanish that I learned while I was there that says, El amor no tiene edad. Love has no age. And that became true for me on my last night in Colombia. What was my intention? What was my feeling as I was heading out of the sexual desert that I experienced here in New England, in Massachusetts? So I'm on the plane, and day 1, we arrive in Miami on the way to Colombia. And at the Miami airport, I run into these 2 really, really gorgeous women. Well, really energetic, sexually energetic women who were Cuban Americans speaking Spanglish. And they had 2 food carts, but they were bigger than food carts. And one of them was Cuban coffee. And the other one was the food thing. I can't remember what the food truck served, because what I do remember is the coffee. And I do remember particularly the woman with the food part, but they were friends and they're right next to each other in the airport. The Cuban coffee, which was served as like a little espresso thing in a small cup, a small drink, that was the best single cup of coffee, I think, that Johnny Soul, needing TLC, has had in years, maybe ever. Little cup of coffee, fucking amazing. The woman, Madeline, and that was the name of my ex-wife, who's a huge nemesis in my life, and Madeline was the lighter-skinned one, very flirtatious and very attractive. And she told me she had 2 kids, and I was trying to practice Spanish with her, and it was easy. And I told her that I had gone to Cuba once, years ago. I could have loved to make love right there in the airport, somewhere off in somewhere, there's places, right? She was so enticing. So here's Johnny en route to Colombia, looking for an oasis, looking for TLC, looking to be able to feel free about his sexual interest. So I'm on the flight and was proud of myself that I found a way to pursue this woman, Jeanette, who was a very sexy Colombian mother with her child, living in Hamburg, Germany, but visiting her mother now in Cali, because the first stop was Cali on the way to Bogota. And what I did was I brought her some extra water. And I told the flight attendants that I was going to do that. And I said, I was interested, and you could tell them. You could tell flight attendants that you were interested in pursuing this attractive woman who was in 2 rows behind me. And we had looked at each other. And you don't feel any shame. You can't even do that now in the United States. Anyway, so things went downhill, though, after that nice gesture, which was that she started asking me, we had a flirtatious dialogue that I initiated in Spanish because I wanted to practice my Spanish with women. And she was dark-skinned, lives in Hamburg, Germany. And I told her that my first girlfriend was named Janet. And so at one point she started looking at me closely and staring and asked if I was from Germany, which was bizarre. I mean, because it's clear that I was American. I said no, that I'd never been there. And then I mentioned the fact that I'm Jewish and my grandparents came from Europe. And I said this mostly in Spanish, but it wasn't that fluid. Then she wondered if they had escaped Hitler, but asked it in a less than sort of somber way. I said no, that they came years before that, and that I'm third generation American. I think I said that in English or Spanish. I went back to my seat, 2 rows ahead, and I was pretty sure it was her laughing loudly with some other female passengers, but I ignored that. At the end of the flight, I got up and looked right at her, and she was still laughing. And I asked if she was laughing at me. She said yes. I said, that's the lowest form of humor, insult humor. And I said that in English. Then I really went at her. And I said, you were laughing at me because I said I'm a Jew. And I said this very loudly, but nobody butted in. She shut up and just stared, and I stared her down. Then later I asked in Spanish if she knows any Hebrew. Not sure what she answered. So I said in Spanish, I speak some Hebrew. And then I stated loudly and forcefully, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael Chai. It's a famous statement in Hebrew. It means the people of Israel live. It's a statement of rebuke. It's a statement of we still survive despite everything. It's a statement of pride. Am Yisrael Chai. And then she said some kind of swear in Spanish at me. So I looked at her and I called her a racist in English. Okay, she's a dark-skinned Colombian. What the fuck? She's being a racist. I don't give a damn what style you are. She's a dark-skinned Colombian making fun of me as a Jew who doesn't speak Spanish that well, and she shut the fuck up. And I felt some cathartic relief. And, you know, it defies all expectations. It defies all categories. A dark-skinned Colombian moves to Germany and becomes an arrogant racist bitch. Defies all expectations. Outcome, Johnny Soul 1, Jeanette 0. So one of the reasons I came to Colombia was I was invited by this friend in Bogota who comes from a large family. And the family has usually every year has a party celebrating the birthdays of 6 cousins, including her, who are born in June. So the party was on Saturday, and I arrived late on Thursday night. And the party was amazing. Amazing. And mostly I'll focus on the really good parts about the party. Well, first of all, people were dancing straight through for about 8 hours. Colombians, Dominicans, Venezuelans, Caribbean people have an incredible love of dance and music and singing as well. And they all know how to do salsa, merengue, bachata, and so forth and so on. And it's really hard for gringos to get it, all right? So I danced, not only because I'm not great at that, but also because I've got a hip issue from a hip replacement and a further thing. I have a rod going down my left side. I set off all airport alarms. So I did maybe about 2 hours of dancing out of the approximately 8 hours. And this was at a very, very, very large house of these very wealthy cousins of hers who own cattle farms, dairy cattle farms, around the outskirts of Bogota, the capital of Colombia. And, they have a McMansion, and they're very, very hyper materialistic. She's not wild about them. I never connected with them at all, that particular host couple. I could tell that they were sort of a little bit crude in terms of, I don't know, social niceties. But they had a gorgeous house with all kinds of stuff, and it was like a nonstop party of many, many elements. There were probably about 70 people there at least. I guess all relatives, friends and stuff too, and people have married into the family. And there was a DJ with an assistant, and the DJ was a cool guy. I spoke to him in Spanish, and I requested some songs, and he played some of the songs I wanted. He played some Van Morrison. He played Brown Eyed Girl, and I got to sing that. Not professionally, but I sang it to people and things like that. And I liked him. And there were times when I just kind of sat by myself, and there were times when I really engaged. And the person I engaged most with on the dancing was an 80-year-old woman, I think an aunt or second cousin of my friend. And she was amazing, 80 years old, in incredible shape, an incredible dancer. She was the best coach I ever had because she kept going with me. She didn't give up. She didn't give up on me, and she kept me occupied and stimulated. What else was going on? I got turned on to the really wonderful Colombian liquor, a liqueur called aguardiente. And aguardiente stands for burning water. And it's 22% alcohol, so it's not nearly as strong as vodka. It looks like vodka. It's clear. You shoot it down, but you can also drink it slowly. I was drinking it fast in these little cups. Somebody was walking by, filling the cup, filling the cup, filling the cup. There was food beyond all expectations. There was celebratory things and art, things to celebrate with. What else? There were just so many things in the house. So much beauty and so much folkloric things. And it turned out that all these relatives of hers, not all, but a huge number of them, are musicians. So the first musician that I got to know was a young second cousin of hers who's living in the United States. And his parents, who moved to Colorado, and before that were living in Fargo, North Dakota, but now are in Denver. His parents were there, and he was there, and his brother was there, and his sister was there. It was a multi-generational thing, at least 3 generations, totally typical of all Latino parties. And the young folks were joining in with the other people, and they had their own room that they were also in. I made contact with all portions of the party. And this one guy named Nico, there was Milo and Nico. And I'm trying to remember which one was which. They were both amazing guys. But one of them was really amazing. And he definitely could be an SDA. What does that stand for? Singer, dancer, actor. Okay, this guy's got incredible charisma, has a band, speaks perfect English and perfect Spanish, very, very good-looking guy, is living, I think he's living at home, or maybe he's living in Boulder, and his parents are living in Denver. I can't remember. He's definitely a candidate for doing a lot of things. And we talked about a lot of things. We had a lot in common. We loved the same kind of music. We talked about women. We talked about America, American women, situations, all kinds of stuff. Unfortunately, I didn't take notes, so I'm not remembering it that well. His younger brother was also an amazing character, and the sister was really cool too. The sister and I talked about the difference between drinking vodka and drinking aguardiente. Anyway, so that was one. But the other musicians there were these guys about my age, and they're folk rock musicians. And after the dancing, which went on for like 7 or 8 hours, they pulled out guitars. And some of them had brought guitars, and others, the homeowner or somebody else, there were guitars there. There's also piano there, but nobody's playing the piano. There were about 4 guys playing guitars. And normally I would have really loved this, but I was feeling a little bit alienated because they didn't do anything to try to include me. That was kind of very distinct from what I believe Americans would have done in that situation if they had a foreign guest. I really believe, from my own experience, people that I know, and we've done a lot of international stuff, to always go out of their way to include other people. You know, they could have asked me if I wanted to sing a song in English, but that didn't happen. So what was really impressive and very much not like our culture is the number of songs that adults know that are common traditional songs. And they're not necessarily, old-fashioned songs, but let's say contemporary folk rock songs or something. Some of them were Cuban songs. Some of them, I think, Peruvian songs. Some of them songs of the Andes, because there's both a Caribbean culture in Colombia and a culture of the mountains, the Andes. And they did all the kind of stuff. And everybody knew the words to every song. And it went on for hours. I mean, that is unheard of in the States. They didn't have song sheets, da da da. I was an organizer of that kind of events in Amherst, Mass. And it's something that's still going on. A group called Rush, Rise Up Singing in Harmony. I created it based on this songbook called Rise Up Singing. And everybody, when I moved to Amherst, I noticed everybody had green Subaru hatchbacks with the same bumper stickers. And everybody had this songbook called Rise Up Singing. And I quickly put that together. We could have had these Saturday night song things in a green hatchback Subaru. We could have been driving around in green hatchback Subarus with the same bumper stickers. But no, Rob, we had it in houses, and it was combination potluck dinner followed by group singing. But people didn't know the words. People had to go to the songbook, okay? You couldn't sing, in America, how many songs would people know in common? This Land Is Your Land. Maybe 5 songs like that, right? This was like dozens and dozens. Everybody knew all the words. All right, rest my case on that. But at one point, I had that conversation about the humor issue with somebody there. And she defended that level of humor. So I'm thinking now, I'm kind of thinking again, not revising my opinion about it, but expanding my opinion about it. Because what I'm realizing and remembering is that it must be connected to the way in which Latin people, the Caribbean people in particular that I know better, Venezuelans, Dominicans, Colombians, Peruvians, I'm not sure if they're the same, I've been there, Puerto Ricans, that they say things directly that we would never say. Like they would call somebody who's fat, they would call them gordito, which is an affectionate version of the word gordo. Gordo means fat. And they would just call him that. In other words, nobody would do that in the States. Or somebody who's black, negrito, things like that. So there's an openness about making fun of. And then the question is it the same as the George W. Bush wet towel flipping in the locker room? And I don't know. I've asked Rob, I've asked Ahmed, I've asked Amelia. Nobody has an answer to that. But it does show that it shows how vastly we are affected by culture. Everybody is. And so that cultural style, to me, at times, felt incredibly insensitive, incredibly annoying, and frustrating. Okay, should Johnny let it go? Should Johnny just be more cool about it? Look, they're going to make fun of me. I'm a gringo. I can't dance right. By the way, there was a very white gringo guy who couldn't dance at all with a very sexy wife. And that very sexy, short, I can still remember her ass, gorgeous ass. And I never tried to dance with her, but Milo, or Nico, I think it's Milo, danced amazingly with her. And the poor guy, he didn't seem upset about anything, but he clearly couldn't dance at all. So compared to him, I'm like Fred Astaire. Anyway, back to that evening. So it finally ended at about 1:30 in the morning. It was really an opening in some ways. It reminded me, though, again, that everybody else was there. Not everybody, but most of the people were there with somebody. Everybody there has this family. It reminded me of not having family, but it also reminded me that the sexual desert and the level of sensuality between these couples was quite strong. Not with all of them. So definitely I saw couples of our generation that have, probably given up on each other. But there was plenty of other style, of a very, very sensual style. And I like that. So one of the days in Cartagena, I went on an organized tour. It wasn't the only one, but it was the best one. And this was a tour of mangrove forests. This thing was enormous. This is miles and miles and miles. And this is north of Cartagena. So you go outside of Cartagena. So on this way north, you start to see these newly planned communities that look like sort of quasi-utopian gated communities near the ocean, on the ocean side, and then also on this bay side. And we saw a number of those on the way up. And then you start to see shacks and absolute extreme poverty of black people, and it is black people, and the people on the coast who are the most indigenous, essentially, are blacks, are descendants of African slaves. And it turns out there's a town which I didn't get to and I wanted to get to in that area north of Cartagena that's a World UNESCO site, the United Nations World Heritage Site of a first African free town. And you start to see these really, really, really poor shack communities that are in the wetlands, essentially. And they're like really isolated. Basically, it looks like people can only get there by a canoe, by some kind of aquatic transportation system. And we're talking real, real, real poverty. Anyway, we get to a location where we sit and have some food, and we started to all talk to each other. And then we got divided into two long dugout type canoes, except they looked exactly like those long dugout canoes that you would see on the Amazon, but they had seats. So we're going through two boats, two canoes, being guided by two young black guys on each of them who are standing up and paddling that way. They call each little narrow pathways through the mangrove forest, they call each of them a tunnel. There were 10 tunnels that we went through. And they got narrower and narrower. But after you go through it, then it opens up, I think almost at each point, or several points along the way, it opened up into a large bay kind of place where we saw other boats, other vehicles on the bay. But you're going through and it's really quiet, it's really tranquil, it's very hot, it's very humid, but it was very pleasant in a lot of ways. And I was hoping to see a lot of amazing animals. We didn't get to see a lot of great birds. We didn't see very many at all. I think it was because of the time of day. What did we see? We saw tiny red crabs that you see at the point where the mangrove tree hits the water. There's lots and lots of crabs on the tree. Oh, and huge, I forgot about these guys, enormous termite nests, like termite nests that you could see from a mile away. I mean, really large. Rob's shaking his head. He's thinking he's going to go home and have termites for dinner tonight. And it's like these termite nests, they glob onto trees and they get bigger and bigger and bigger. There's, what's it like? Termite imperialism, I guess, right? Yeah. Okay. So termite imperialism we saw everywhere. And we got a kick out of that. And then we got to the very end after the 10th tunnel and we're in an open area. And who's waiting for us but a guy named Juan? And Juan was, as the expression goes, as black as night. Really, really black guy. And he's a fisherman. And he, was missing teeth and all that stuff. And I was thinking afterwards, we were talking about him, and, we say he could have been any age. He might have been 40, but looked, ageless. I mean, looked very old, but could be any age. But how does this guy make his living? He's a fisherman with a net, and he makes money from doing this stuff for tourists as well, which is that he taught each of us how to throw correctly a fishing net. And I didn't do it well. And almost nobody did it well, except Juan Carlos, who I got to be friendly with later, and he was part of that couple that was on the other boat. Juan Carlos, the second time around, did it perfectly. And what was perfectly, you have to like swing it behind you. It's like swinging a baseball bat, and you have to let it go. And you have to let it go at the right moment so it opens up and it flies out there. All right. And then you wheel it in. You reel it in, wheel it in, pull it in. And it's pretty damn heavy in throwing it and reeling it in. And then whatever fish are in there is what you've caught. He caught some beautiful fish. I've got a photograph of him holding fish right next to us and so forth. And then we returned. And then on the bus back, I really connected with Juan Carlos and his wife, Paulu. So Paulu, amazing woman. And she speaks English perfectly and translates at about 100,000 miles an hour. And she and Juan Carlos speak broken English, but much better English than I speak Spanish. He's a psychologist, and I think he has a PhD in psychology. And she's a artist and art teacher, and very, very interested in being an academic and getting a PhD and going all over the world. And she's lived in Toronto and everything. So we decide to meet up that night at this really great restaurant bar called Cafe Del Mar, Cafe of the Sea. Overlooks, it's in the old city of Cartagena. It's right next to a cannon. And there is a photograph of me next to the cannon that they haven't sent me. They have to send that to me. We were up on the garden, on the rooftop, on the roof deck, restaurant part of it, restaurant bar, and they had set up a huge TV to watch major soccer. So the Latin American Soccer League was in its finals, and this was semifinal game between Argentina and Brazil. And I was rooting for Argentina because I'm sick of Brazil for various reasons. But most of the people were rooting for Brazil. There were also some, and Argentina lost, Brazil won 2-0. Juan Carlos, it turns out, is an avid football player and is in a league and everything. And they're both 28 years old, and they look like the most wonderful couple in the world, and yet they've decided not to have kids. And I was kind of surprised, and they've decided that because they live in Bogota and they want to pursue the international thing, and she especially wants to be an academic. So at one point, she's talking about her artwork, and I realized this is a really free-thinking, very, very sophisticated woman. I realized, okay, she's teaching photography to high school kids, and she's got to know who my sister is. She's into photography. She's bound to know who my sister is. I barely know who my sister is, but my sister is a world-famous photographer. So I mentioned my sister's name, and she went unbelievable. It was like an orgasm or something. But then we got into a really cool discussion. I asked her, what it was that she loved about my sister's photography, and she gave a great answer, and it was a very thoughtful answer, and that was exciting. There was a lot of adrenaline rush that whole night with them. What a great night! Screaming about the game, watching the game. The game's over. Having great drinks, great company. I mean, how often do I get that? Go figure. That's what Johnny says.